Lists. We usually associate them with the non-literary, the mundane, like shopping lists, to-do lists, and checklists. But I believe they are a valuable stylistic device for literary writers to use. Wilson, in his book on ellipsis and stylistic variation, Mind the Gap, says lists can be put to literary use, particularly in the compressed language of poetry or poetic prose. This points to the most obvious value of lists to writers. They convey a lot of information in few words, so minimum input results in maximum output or meaning. But this is just one of the many assets the list offers to us. To better understand the potential for lists to be used in literature, I looked at Jonathan Safran Foer's short story, Here We Aren't So Quickly. This story spans somewhere between 20 to 30 years in just a few pages, exploring the narrator's and his wife's or partner's relationship. Unlike conventional short stories, the reader isn't given a single tangible image, scene, or plot to imagine. Instead, Foer strips the story down to a list of the narrator's memories, feelings, questions, and other seemingly disconnected fragments of information. For example, it begins, I was not good at drawing faces. I was just joking most of the time. I was not decisive in changing rooms or anyway. I was so late because I was looking for flowers. I was just going through a tunnel whenever my mother called. I was not able to make toast without the radio. When asked why he chose to write in such a distinct voice, Foer said he was inspired by similar stories that experimented with shifting rapidly between perspectives, using pronouns rhythmically, and condensing time into details. This gives us an insight into some of the stylistic effects that can be leveraged by writing in lists, which I think requires further investigation. As I was reading the text, I felt both like time was slipping away and like I was stuck or stifled. This tension between rapid movement and stagnation reflects the narrator's state of mind. He feels as if time, or the middle of his life, has slipped away quickly, but also like time is standing still. After everything, it's like nothing. This quote encapsulates the style of the whole story. We are presented with everything, an overwhelming amount of details from the last 30 years, but at the same time, everything feels like nothing, or insignificant almost. This immersive reading experience is the result of the list's double-edged sword. It both gives the illusion of time passing quickly by condensing time into fleeting fragments of information, and also the illusion of time standing still by slowing the pace of the piece with its repetitive rhythmic quality. This somewhat paradoxical effect is evoked when reading this excerpt, in which the narrator's son's first 20 to 30 years of life are compressed into 3 sentences. He suddenly drew, suddenly spoke, suddenly wrote, suddenly reasoned. One night I couldn't help him with his math. He got married. Note that what we normally focus on, as both writers and readers, is left out. The plot, the actual links between the events we're presented with, and the time that passes between them, is replaced with or reduced to punctuation marks. Because of this skeletal form of the list, time becomes compressed and slippery. Therefore, just as the narrator struggles with the fact that his life, the middle, has passed so quickly, the reader gets the impression of time slipping away out of their control. This compression of time results in a compression or stifling of emotion. By linking events with punctuation rather than plot, the space for reader response is removed. Readers can't contemplate the significance of the event they've just read because they are immediately presented with a separate significant event. For example, when we read that you were too injured by things that happened in the distant past for anything to be effortless in the present, we aren't given any time to contemplate what this means or what happened in the distant past to make her feel that way. In other words, what the context is lost. Interpretation is delayed by another detail. I was always struggling to be natural with my hands, and then you were never immune to unexpected gifts, and so on. This relentless listing of contextless details continually distances the reader from the emotion of the text, which mirrors the sense of alienation experienced by the narrator. He says that the more I remember, the more distant I feel. So, by compressing time and evoking a sense of the past slipping away uncontrollably, the list creates distance between the reader and the text's emotion, just as the narrator feels distanced or removed from his past. This distance is lengthened by the list's repetitive and rhythmic form. Although time seems to pass rapidly, it simultaneously seems to pass in small increments, resulting in a feeling of stagnation. For example, the repetition of the word suddenly and the frequent use of punctuation in this excerpt creates a monotonous, almost hypnotic rhythm. He suddenly drew, suddenly spoke, suddenly reasoned. Another example of this is when the narrator remembers how we went to Atacama, we went to Sarajevo, we went to Toby Pond every year until we didn't. The repetition of the pronoun we, and by using the same sentence structure, constructed using a subject, verb, and object repeatedly, far undercuts the excitement that should be evoked by the events he's describing. They're travelling the world to new and exciting places, and yet a sense of monotony is fostered by the list's rhythm. This reflects the narrator's state of mind, his regrets that his life and marriage have been reduced to a series of fleeting, monotonous memories, that after everything it's like nothing. This sense of mundanity is heightened by the way in which Fowell places the ordinary and the extraordinary side by side in lists. This juxtaposition is exemplified by this quote, in which Thanksgiving dinners, the death of the narrator's father, and destroying a passport in the wash are presented alongside each other, as if they share the same degree of significance to the narrator. Consequently, the extraordinary, like the death of his father, becomes equated with the ordinary, like destroying a passport, and vice versa. As a result, the boundaries between the significant or profound and the insignificant collapse, causing the reader to dismiss seemingly pivotal events like the death of family members as insignificant. Thus, important moments in the narrator's life, or the climax of the story, becomes reduced to fleeting, monotonous memories. Everything, all the emotion, all the effects and consequences of these moments become nothing. So, what can we as writers learn from Fowler's lists? Well, firstly, that by connecting fleeting details with punctuation rather than plot, we can compress time and emotion. By using repetitive declarative sentences, we can create rhythm, causing time to stand still, and by juxtaposing moments of significance with the mundane, we can undermine the climax of the story. Put these stylistic effects to the test and uncover some of the list's other benefits to writers. I experimented with using lists in my own work. In a short story I wrote about a young woman who returns to her parents' house after running away from a home a year ago. It begins, "It's funny how things don't change even after a year, even after everything. The chipped green paint on the front door, the way the door creaks as you push it open, the coldness of the wooden floorboards inside, the pencil markings on the yellow wall at the end of the hallway recording my growth, etc. Instead of describing the action occurring in this scene, that she is walking through the front door of the house, down the hallway and into the kitchen, the narrator lists specific details as she sees and feels them. By replacing the action of the scene with objects, the narrator removes the space for drama and emotion, in the same way Fowler replaced plot with punctuation. This highlights the fact that the narrator does not want to deal with the emotional consequences of her actions. In addition to allowing me to compress and delay emotion, the list also allowed me to integrate backstory in an emotionally stunted way. For example, as the narrator lists the things she doesn't or can't tell her parents, she implicitly reveals things to the reader about her past, like the fact that she has had an abortion, that her parents fight, that she was angry because she was ashamed of her pregnancy, and that she has been forced to steal food to survive. In the same way that Fowler conveyed pivotal moments alongside insignificant moments, I have placed these important moments of backstory between mundane details, like the fact that she's learning French and has grown to like broccoli. Consequently, the intense emotion surrounding these events becomes suppressed, mirroring the way the narrator is trying to suppress and avoid her own emotions. This suppression of emotion is further conveyed by the anticlimactic lists I incorporated into the story. For example, when the narrator's father comes home and sees her for the first time in a year, she merely slips over this moment, as if it's unimportant. I hear Dad come through the front door, listen to his slightly uneven footsteps, his slightly wheezy breath, his slightly shocked "oh" as he enters the kitchen. Again, this removes the space for emotion, reflecting the narrator's disconnection to her own interiority. This is further exemplified by the final sentence of my piece, which is built up by the narrator to be the climax of the scene. I've run through it in my mind over and over and over until it's become like an artifact from the past, from another life, another history. However, this expectation of a climax is met with a list of mundane discussion topics. We talk about the weather, politics, the drought, the price of fuel. This is just one example of the many ways we can incorporate lists into our work, especially when we want to create a meaningful experience for our readers in a short amount of words. Therefore, the list can do more than just organise your shopping items. By stripping story to its bare bones, compressing time, and juxtaposing the extraordinary against the ordinary, we can create a unique and perhaps even unnerving experience for our readers, one which immerses them in the minds of our emotionally dysfunctional narrators.